Alan in Montreal, Canada. Hi, Alan. You're calling about abusing statistics in theistic arguments?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me well?
Yeah, yep. There's a little bit of weird mechanical sort of sound, but otherwise it's okay.
Okay. So the abuse statistics that I've seen in theistic arguments is really related to like the fine-tuning arguments of sorts.
Okay.
Often you'll hear theists claim stuff like, those huge numbers, like there's a 1 in a trillion, whatever chance of getting the gravity right, or whichever stat they want to choose.
Right.
And the problem with the way they're looking at it is that just because the window is small, it doesn't mean that the statistic is small. So, for example, if I roll 1 dice, the chance of getting 6 is 1 in 6. But if I roll 2 dice, then the chance of getting 6 is much higher. So when you just use statistics like just at face value and say like, oh, it's a small window, therefore it's a small probability, you're making a problem. You're creating like this false implication that the probability of getting a thing is the same as the representation of the thing. And it's also other statistical abuses that they use is sometimes just because there's a small chance, it means that the thing that has a higher chance of getting the same result is the correct one. But that's not true, because let's say 1 million lottery players try to play the lottery and 1 person wins. Well, you could say that the lottery was rigged, but that's not necessarily the case, because you also have a lot of people trying the lottery. So you would have to look at what the chances of being rigged are, and not just the chances of somebody winning without it being rigged.
Yeah, I don't know if this helps, but I always think of it in terms of, what if you had a giant jar that could hold a million dice, right? And you throw those dice out of that jar onto a giant table, and however those dice land, the odds are astronomical that they would land that way.
That particular combination,
right?
Yeah.
Astronomical. And yet, who would argue that that's evidence of design? And if you put them back in the jar and you roll them again and you get a different configuration, the odds are exactly the same astronomical odds. And it's the same no matter what you roll.
And the analogy I like to use is that not only do you not know the statistical representation of it, you also the problem with it is that you don't know. So let's say you have a 3 dice, right, that come out, and you have 6, 6, and 6, right? But you don't know what was in the bag in the first place. So you can't tell at all what the chances of getting 6, 6, and 6 are, because that information is not available to you.
I'm not sure I'm following.
Well, the theists will usually look at what we've got, right, which is a universe that's conducive to life, for example, right?
Sure.
All right.
But they'll infer from that the chances were low without it being rigged. But because they're not privy to the information of what's in the bag, what happened before.
Right, we have a sample size of 1.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And also, I would say that the universe, I mean, I agreed to it, I think, a little too quickly. I don't think the universe is conducive to life. I think it's kind of, people have talked about, the idea of the universe being designed, and one of my notes is that if something is designed to do a thing, it's kind of ridiculous that the thing that it does is like a minor aspect of it, right? If you want something that cleans your floor and yet it does like a billion other, it's like if I saw something that managed to, I guess, get the floor clean, but it basically did tons of other things a lot more, I don't think I'd assume that it's a floor cleaner, right? I mean, if it may be that this thing as a sideline, the floor gets cleaned by whatever else it's doing, But if it's doing other things, like vastly more, I would tend to, if I was going to look at whether or not I thought this thing was built or created for some reason, I would be looking at what does it do mostly, not what does it do here and there, like as a weird minor blip.
Yeah, as far as we know, the universe is mostly empty space. So how can you say it was designed for life just because we happen to be here looking at it? But you say, gravity is just the right spot for us. Well, that's because we're here looking at it. If it was some other slightly different value, then another life form might be looking up at it and saying the same thing. This was designed for us.
Well, I've heard people actually say that, the Earth's distance from the sun is like some kind of sweet spot. And it's interesting to me because the Earth doesn't orbit in a perfect circle. So you have this this reality where the Earth goes off, further and further, like further and shorter, like closer and further, I guess, from the sun in its own orbit, and yet we don't die every time it goes like further. I don't know, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's like an appeal to statistics that are it's just kind of an irrelevant set of points, and sometimes even claiming things that really can't be claimed, like knowledge that we don't have, would be required to make it significant. And it's not really even significant if it's rare, because even rare events occur.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's one of those things that just that bothers me crazy when these statistics are brought up, because it's not how statistics works. You're abusing probabilities, and it's just not how things work.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, if you had like for example, if we had those million dice, right, and before I rolled them, John was able to map out where they would land, and he was correct every time I did it, even though I wasn't aware that John was doing this, but other people were. Like if we ran a test where he could accurately predict where all those dice would land, and even if we numbered the dice so that you were predicting like this one. And if John could predict that every single time correctly, I would say that we've got something to actually investigate there, right? Because now we have evidence that there's something going on that allows predictability.
Yeah, it's not just random.
Right, because if I just throw those dice and nobody has predicted it, then the odds are astronomical the way they're going to land, and yet every time I roll it, it's still the same astronomical odds no matter what the result. So
yeah, I mean,
you have to have there's got to be some evidence for the idea that it's supposed to be this, not just that it is this. And that's what's lacking.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you, and it's just that's one of the things that bothers me the most. And thank you, Tracie. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Appreciate your call.